Howdy partners, welcome to this week's Norwich City PinkUn.com podcast. Given the curtains have fallen on that dismal Premier League campaign, we probably expected for a little bit of a gap in terms of a podcast before we could bring you the next one, but it's still been a very, very busy week in the Norwich City sphere. We're going to talk all things Mark Attanasio and Stuart Webber as well, who of course did that interview, which has been a little bit lost in the events of the last few days. I'll apologise in advance and say that the excitement of the last few days means my voice is leaving me a little bit. I've got a Lemsip in hand and I'm hoping that I'll make it through this pod, but that's why I'm going to leave it up to Paddy, Davitt and Adam Harvey to do the majority of the talking on this week's show. So if we start with you then, Pad, it's been a quite old week, hasn't it, for Norwich City?
You said you were going to wear a Stetson, Connor. I don't see it on your head, which doesn't really work on an audio podcast, but there you go. No comeback.
I'm feeling delicate enough about wearing a hat, you know.
Yeah, no, it's been well, yeah. I mean, as we said, just to paint the picture. Obviously, I'm sure everybody is now well aware that it was the PinkUn which broke that story on Friday afternoon last. But maybe what people aren't aware of was we were all happened to be in the same room on a strategy day, really, which is essentially where we kind of take a stock take of all our content from last season across all our platforms and kind of then throw it forward to next season, what we could maybe do better. Plenty. I can hear now people shouting at their radios or whatever down their smartphones, but and essentially just locking ourselves in a room and trying to kick ideas about. So, you know, we happened to be all in the same space, which was why it made it even more surreal. The events kind of then Friday afternoon, really. You know, we'd obviously been working on that story for a number of days, pulling various strands together. We had Paul Chesterton's superb picture of Mr. Attanasio, his two sons, Richard Resler, another long-term friend, financier, and then three of the Brewers' top exec team, all sat in a line, bookended by Anthony Rickens, City's finance director, and at the other end, Zoe Ward, executive director. So you could call that the smoking gun, essentially. But, you know, around that, we had to wrap who are these people, what are they, why are they sat here in little old Norfolk watching Norwich and Tottenham Hotspur as it was in the Premier League. And when we felt ready to go with that, then all hell broke loose on Friday. So, yeah, no, it was... There's a book in that, but we'll keep that up our sleeves for a suitable juncture. But suffice to say, yeah, it hasn't been the most relaxing end to the post end to the season I can remember, and I've done a few of these. There is normally a lull. You're right. I mean, you've started to see various social media accounts of footballers on holidays, and what tends to happen is that football in general takes a break until, you know, certainly the transfer window maybe opens, which is next month now, very shortly, and then beyond that pre-season. But no, this is really, as you say, the hors d'oeuvre being Stuart Webber's club interview on the Thursday afternoon, lest we forget, followed by that story on the Friday afternoon. It's been manic and you know, really interesting to see on the US side of it how this develops now. You know, I mean, we'll probably drill down into it, but essentially where we are now, you know, just to bullet point it, is that we have a group of potential, and we keep using the words like potential and possible investors in discussions with Norwich City, senior execs at Norwich City. They visit Garrow, they visit Colney, there's one or two other locations we believe they've been at as well. So essentially then it's why are they there, what's going on, and you know, there's no doubt there are some high-level talks at an increasingly advanced stage about potential shareholding. Now, what that looks like, is that on the takeover spectrum and Delia and Michael stepping aside completely, or is it, as the soundings we have sort of seem to suggest, maybe certainly the start of a longer-lasting partnership, which may, if you look at clubs like Leeds and Arsenal, to name but two, lead to potentially the US investors taking a front seat role as opposed to a back seat role. So, you know, really intriguing, so many strands to this, but fundamentally, as it's been received, I think, by most Norwich fans, a very exciting development. And, you know, to tie the two episodes together, Stuart Webber did tease within 2 to 3 weeks an exciting / surprising announcement. let's hope that is related to US investment, because if it is, then I think that would very much fall into the exciting and surprising. And then if it's all confirmed, it's over the line and we move forward, a really exciting new chapter in the history of Norwich City Football Club.
Yeah, I fear breaking that story is actually broken me a little bit as well, and broken my voice a little bit. So this feels like almost like the come down after last week, which was, as you say, very manic, very frantic. We did eventually get it over the line, thank goodness for that. And yeah, I've seen some wild conspiracy theories about the timing of it all. That literally was just when it all pieced together, and we were ready, as you say, to push the button on it. It was no relation to the Stuart Webber interview, for example, as I've seen implied. We were actually working on this long before that dropped, and probably news of that dropped as well. So it's something that we've had up our sleeve for a little while. And like you say, Pat, it was an interesting week piecing it all together and answering some of those questions that you put forward there. And I mean, I've got the picture in front of me. I'll run through who's in that picture in case you have missed it. So this is from left to right. Anthony Richins, obviously Norwich City's financial director. You've then got Mark Attanasio, who's the principal owner and chairman of the Brewers. You've got his son Mike. He is Richard Resler is sandwiched in between his sons, essentially. Richard Resler is on the advisory board of the Brewers, co-founder of the CMI Group as well, long-standing business partner. There's a really good piece on the PinkUn Plus app about their kind of 40-year relationship, introducing. I think Richard introduced Mark to his wife, and there's various other strands to that. Really good read. Check that out. Dan as well. David Stearns, who is almost like, from what I can gather, I'm not a massive baseball fan. By massive, I say I know nothing about baseball whatsoever. He is almost the Stuart Webber equivalent of what we can figure out. He's head of baseball operations. You've then got Dan Fumai, who's the chief financial officer, and then Rick Scheslinger, who's the president of business operations, and then you've got Zoe Ward on the end of that. So that was the party, the Magnificent Seven, some might say, Adam. I mean, this is a really interesting story that's come at a very interesting time for Norwich, because as Paddy spoke to Kieran Maguire yesterday, football finance expert, and again, you can watch and read that chat on all of our channels. Actually, relegation might have made Norwich City more attractive to investors, in this case, American investors, rather than maybe if they'd have been in the Premier League because of the drop in value.
Yeah, exactly that. Kieran alluded to it yesterday that Norwich City shares now are more attractive to a buyer because they're, obviously effectively not being priced at a Premier League price. They're a Championship price, and a lot of these Americans are now interested in the English game, the opportunities to get themselves into the Premier League. And obviously we all know that the background of Mark Attanasio is very much buying and selling the club in the future for more value than what he's bought it for. And obviously if he can get Norwich in the Premier League and stabilise them there, then there's definitely an opportunity, particularly with the growth of obviously the broadcasting rights that we imagine will come in the future. Obviously more the overseas rights as opposed to the domestic ones, obviously the likes of Netflix and that are going to have an interest. And obviously that's quite pertinent in the fact that he is an American investor. I mean, I was looking a little while ago, 8 Premier League teams now have American owners or investors in their squad. That's Arsenal, Aston Villa, Crystal Palace, Fulham, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester United, and obviously Chelsea within the last 24 hours. So, there's definitely a growing kind of in the English game of American investors. And obviously a lot of those clubs are quite successful. And obviously the teams like Crystal Palace and even the likes of Leeds have now started to sort of slowly stabilise themselves into the Premier League. And obviously that's ultimately the target of Norwich. And most fans are now slightly getting fed up with this yo-yo in between divisions. And I think this frustration of maybe lack of investment and the self-funded model has been quite a topical kind of conversation amongst fans, and they just want to see their team compete in the Premier League. And I feel like in the long term, this exciting and, well, probably quite surprising news, if it gets over the line, could be an opportunity that Norwich actually can go and do that.
You've accidentally said surprising and exciting there, which chimes with Stuart Webber's announcement, which is brilliant. Pad, I mean, I'll come on to what you spoke about with Kieran Maguire, but there was a really good piece I wanted to reference by Gary Field on My Football Writer, who wrote about shares and the logistics and maybe what any kind of investment would look like from obviously a full-scale takeover, which is worth stressing we don't think is happening at this stage, to maybe and Attanasio, his group as well, and he sort of co-owns the Brewers, so that there's quite a few. Richard Resler, who was at Carrow, being one of those. But there's this idea that the club can offer new shares to people, and that would offer a cash injection into the club, wouldn't it, straight away, rather than say him coming in and buying out some of the current shareholders, which would just essentially mean money changing hands. So if we're looking at investment and injecting coffers immediately into Norwich City, then it would be probably make sense for it to be the kind of new shares line rather than buying out Michael Folger, buying out Delia and Michael, for example. That would seem to be the mechanical way that we who aren't finance experts look at it, and you look at it and say that makes probably the most sense in the current situation if they're not going for a full-scale takeover, which again we must stress doesn't look to be the case.
Absolutely. I mean, two things. Yeah, that would chime with, you never have the sense, because I'm sure if Delia and Michael per se, rather than Michael Folger as the major shareholding union, for want of a better word, Norwich at various periods in recent times, certainly since they got to the Premier League 2 seasons ago, they could have actively sold this football club. There's no doubt about it. If they'd have wanted to do that and were driven by financial incentives, they could have made tens and tens and tens of millions of pounds. And whatever you think of them, whatever you feel the limitations of a self-funded model, that's not why they're involved in Norwich. That's not why they got into Norwich originally. That's not why they brought up 25 years worth of boardroom longevity in the last season. This idea that they're looking to make a book, which is a pertinent term, maybe talking with the US in mind, but it's detached from reality. They, as they always say, they're custodians. They don't like the term owners. They don't like the term top brass or hierarchy. They see themselves as not distinct, but part of the community, part of the fan base, who all rally behind Norwich City Football Club. They just happen to be, in positions of influence and shaping the direction of travel. But fundamentally, they are fans and they are passionate about ensuring what comes next is right for Norwich City, is right for that fan base, is right in not only the short but the medium and long term. That there is, as Webber himself said in that interview on last Thursday, there is a club that in 20 years' time, maybe he comes back here with his boy now, and they can be proud of their part in what Norwich is and always will be, which is a community-founded football club. So for me, I don't think there's any prospect that of those scenarios you painted in terms of, and I've actually just found the Kieran Maguire quote, who is, let's be honest, the Don of football finance. If you want to speak to anybody in the game about Kieran Maguire and about football finance in general, he is the man. I mean, I'll let you into a little anecdote you told me before we pressed record on that interview, that this is the level of person he speaks to in the game. When the Super League thing blew up, earlier in the season, and you can imagine his services and his expertise and insight were very much in demand. He said his wife came to him about Thursday of that week and said, "I'm seeing more of you on the television than I am actually over the dinner table. So tonight we will be eating whatever, and that phone will be staying firmly away." And of course, what happens, I think, as the plates were about to be brought to the table, his phone goes. Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister, who's basically wanted an hour's worth of his time because he was appearing in front of some sort of parliamentary committee the following day, I think connected to the Super League. And as Maguire said, he put the phone on loudspeaker and his wife couldn't believe it. It was Gordon Brown down the other end of the phone. So this is the level of guy who, if you haven't already consumed that video, please get yourself across to the PinkUn video channels. And there is tremendous insight to be had. But long-winded way of getting round to this very specific point about, and I'll read directly verbatim what he said. Maguire mapped out 2 paths to potential new investment at Carrow Road. Quote, "You can buy all or a proportion of the shares from the existing shareholders. There's no advantage to the club in that because that's cash changing hands between individuals." And that is where I'm coming from. I don't see Michael and Delia essentially wanting to walk off into the sunset with wallets stuffed with dollar bills. That's not what they're about. They haven't been about that at any point in the last 25 years. So I don't see that scenario playing out. The second way, said Maguire, is for the club itself to issue shares, which is this point, as you say, raised by Gary Field. And a very good piece that was too. And certainly within Norwich's own constitution, says Maguire, that is feasible. Then the cash is injected into the club. And then he goes on to say that when I said, well, is that something you've heard in terms of a template happening elsewhere. He actually came back at me with Leeds, basically. If we take a look at what we've seen with Leeds United, they've had the San Francisco 49ers, very well-known NFL club, take a similar approach. They bought some shares initially from the owner, Radzani, I think his name is, and they've invested cash to top that up as well. And then just to add to that story, having done a little bit of research, I think there are agreements in place that they can eventually buy up all the existing shares and Ellen Road as well, so that the point is reached in, I think, 2024, I saw as the deadline for that they would then become the sole owners of Leeds United, lock, stock and barrel, having done that in a very incremental, collegiate, collaborative approach. So the precedent is there. Norwich, as we know, both through that Gary Field piece and more broadly, are able to issue that share capital. And that is clearly a vehicle, I'm sure, as Maguire said, there's some very astute people in Norwich's finance team. They'll be aware of all the potential scenarios, and they will, I am adamant, being discussed with Attanasio and his team to see where is the common ground. And for me, everything we're hearing, the sense you get, the characters involved on both sides of this lead you to think that this won't be a changing of the guard and a major takeover at this stage. I think it's going to be far more, if it comes to pass with that caveat, it's going to be far more of a moving forward together, and then with the right framework in place that potentially there is a succession from the current owners to maybe Attanasio and his team in the future. But, there's no doubt about it. If you go and watch that Kieran Maguire piece, and as Adam rightly touched on earlier, US investment and English football are now entwined, very much so, and that is only going to continue. So, it's no surprise in that context that a club like Norwich City would be attractive to a potential US investor.
Yeah, more so when, as we have done in the last week or so, when you dig into Mark Attanasio and his values and what he's done in the Brewers, he obviously bought them in 2004 for $223 million. I think it was then a significant amount of money. The latest reports that they're now worth over £1 billion. So that goes to show the growth and the progression that he's overseen. But Adam, there's a really interesting thing that you tweeted the other day, but that we kind of picked up on last week as well, in kind of the process of uncovering and breaking this story about his values and what he wants from in that instance, obviously a baseball team, but actually you compare it to how Delia and Michael have operated in the last 25 years, and there's plenty of common ground, and you can understand why someone who clearly wants to develop in the long term. He has a lot of staff members who have worked with him for a significant period of time. He's grown that club over a significant period of time, not absolutely splashing the cash in the way that maybe this conversation would be if we were talking about Chelsea, for example, but gradual progression, investing in good people, but also retaining a community focus. That all sounds very similar to the club that we're talking about at the moment that's just dropped out of the Premier League.
I think that's probably the clearest parallels between, Mark Attanasio and Delia and Michael. And I think that's probably the most important thing that Norwich City retain is that community feel. They are obviously a family club, and some people don't like that tag, but I think it's quite an important thing that in the community you've got somewhere where everyone has a shared value, and obviously Norwich City, everyone supports them and backs them and wants them to do very, very well. And obviously the values of, Mark Attanasio's baseball team, a competitive team is something that most Norwich City fans feel maybe we haven't had in the Premier League. And I think if he can bring that to Norwich and Norwich can retain themselves in the Premier League for many a season, then I think most fans would probably feel that is a step forward, obviously, because a lot of people are starting to get frustrated with the yo-yo tag. But I think probably the most important things is the sort of delivering a really good fan experience. I mean, a lot of these bigger clubs now sort of have these fan parks outside the stadium before a match day where all the fans can go and sort of congregate and sort of, effectively give their sort of views on the game and communicate with other fans. And obviously that, to me, is quite an important thing that maybe Norwich don't have at the moment, that opportunity to network with other fans and share views. And I think if Norwich can do that, then that probably ties into one of the other bullet points on his shared values, and that's being a leader in the community. I think that's an opportunity to maybe also raise funds for the likes of the CSF, which I think will be quite important and probably something he needs to promote when he comes over here and gets his opportunity to maybe invest in Norwich City and obviously build on the work of the CSF and the Nest. Obviously, I think we obviously believe that he's been up there as well, and obviously that's a pretty attractive site for him to go and look at, because that's obviously a really good setup up there. And Norwich obviously have the women's team now that play up there, and a lot of the work they do is sort of the people that have disabilities and maybe aren't a little bit less well off than other people in the community. So I think if they can build on that as well, then that's another major sort of pretty big sort of thing to build from. And obviously as well, I think the organisation in terms of in the actual club, I think that they want to try and make it an attractive place to work and maybe bring more job opportunities. And I think that again is only another positive for the area of Norwich. So if you can sort of maintain those values, bring them over and effectively add those to what Delia and Michael already have and just build off that, then I think that's definitely something that's pretty positive for Norwich going forward.
Yeah, and as you say there, Adam, and as Pad said earlier on, we're led to believe that they were at the Nest on Sunday. They certainly visited Colney as well while they were over here. So that's a suggestion that they visited, obviously, the two main club sites, but also the community focus as well. Obviously, that's led by the Community Sports Foundation, who do a wonderful job at the Nest, but also more widely in the community. So at least there is a suggestion of a willingness to get involved with that. Of course, if any deal could be pulled over the line, I think I've seen a few people say, so I'm not fully taking credit for this, Pad, but I've seen a few people say, given the maybe the EFL's owners and directors test, when obviously a club hopes to add directors to its board, isn't the most rigorous process in the world, given some of the characters that have squirmed their way into English football and not made a success of it and ruined football clubs. Delia and Michael, 25 years of experience, they know, and I'm sure they have been approached several times by people who are chancers, who maybe don't fit the value of the clubs or have ambitions that maybe don't sit well with their core values or the core values of the club. So many people are saying, many supporters are saying, it was got to a stage where you've got 7 of them lined up in the director's box, including obviously a multi-millionaire who I'm sure is wealthy enough that he didn't need to make that trip if he didn't want to. That probably suggests that they're happy, they're content with the type of characters and the type of personalities that are potentially going to become investment partners at Norwich City.
And ultimately, that has to go a long way in this process because, to reprise what we just said earlier, they are the majority shareholders. It would need their buy-in completely to this process to move forward, whatever shape that takes. And so much of how they carry themselves, I always think, observing from a slight distance, is the personal relationships. It is the human element with them. They aren't distant. You see them there on a match day. You see them on tours. The last tour we went on, they're sat at the side of the pitch in their deck chairs, almost like just choose my words, kind of just interested in football. And there was a game there, and they just sat down and decided they'd watch it. They're just persons essentially, and that connection I think would matter hugely to them. Yes, you've got executives at Norwich who can drill down into the nitty gritty of how a deal could be put together and the financial element, the legal element. Kieran Maguire talking about, you don't want to go down the path that Burnley would seem to have gone down, where they've had a lot of debt loaded onto the club and all the pitfalls that come with that. All of that, there are people both inside Norwich City and I'm sure plenty of legal advice they can consult to get to a common ground with their American counterparts. But so many, I'd imagine so much of this is the vibe that Delia and Michael get from a Mark Attanasio, a Richard Resler, if they're the two leading lights in this potential investment vehicle. And if there is, as Adam rightly mapped out, that shared belief in what a sporting entity can do for a community, that it's there for the community, it's part of the community. It wants people in the community to feel invested in their club, baseball club, football club, to be proud of it, to be proud of their area. Delia and Michael are very passionate about Norwich and Norfolk as an area and standing up for that. And that clearly there does seem to be a lot of synergy between how those respective owners maybe run their respective organisations. But I thought it was quite telling that Wise's two sons there as well. The family element. We know how much Delia and Michael talk about Norwich being a family club and feeling part of the family and feeling part of the community. She talked again about that recently, how much the pandemic brought that home when fans were not allowed into the stadiums, how disconnected people felt. And then when they were allowed in initially in those 2000 sort of capped games, that iconic moment where I think it was Sheffield Wednesday, the first game where fans were allowed back, and her and Michael strode over to the South Stand where those fans were situated and just had a moment, just a connection with that fan group who were very, very fortunate to be in the ground that day after a lengthy period where everybody was having to consume it remotely if you were a Norwich City fan. So for him to have his sons over as well, again, I'm not saying there was any kind of, design to that, but if that's, he's a family man and family means so much to him. And, I'm sure you've probably seen, we've done a few profile pieces as well. And there's a clip on YouTube about the sons singing that, which is a tradition, I believe, singing the US anthem prior to the baseball games. And their granddad did it for the Brewers for 10 years before he passed away. I think it was 2015. And the next game thereafter, I think, his passing, his two sons took to the microphone, full stadium, belting out the national anthem. And behind them are his dad, Mark Attanasio, his mother, you assume. I think there was a daughter there as well. They're clearly a very tight-knit family. And all of these things matter. You may think, well, what's that got to do with how much he's got in his bank account and how much he's willing to invest in Norwich? Yes, of course, all those elements need to be right. But the human element, I think, to Delia and Michael particularly, would matter exponentially more so than, if this was just a transactional arrangement between a US investor and an English football club. So all of that goes into the sense that this is moving and it's moving in a positive direction.
Absolutely that. And like you say, there will be a generation of fans who don't know what Norwich City look like without Delia and Michael. I mean, they've owned Norwich City throughout my lifetime, for example, throughout yours as well, Adam. So, I mean, there's plenty to kind of look at. But I think many people are saying that even if this deal now doesn't get done for one reason or another, and we know how complex and intricate investment talks can be and how fragile they can be as well. They can fall apart pretty quickly, but equally they can get done pretty quickly. And I was looking actually last night, I think it was, there's a brilliant thread on Twitter by Mark Foster, who's a Norwich fan but also a big baseball fan, who said that actually there was a similar report as to ours that emerged when he was in the process of buying the Brewers, and by the end of the month he was their new owner basically. So it doesn't seem like he's going to be scared off necessarily by the fact that it's come out into the public domain. But the fact that it's got this far, again, as we say, is probably an indication that there is a little bit of optimism maybe about how it can go. But Adam, looking at it from the longer picture, I mean, we've kind of teased around this self-funding argument, which has persisted at Norwich City, certainly for the last decade now that I can remember. Maybe it's ramped up more recently in the last 5 years, as you say, there's more of an American influence in the game, and there are more wealthy people getting involved with football clubs at this moment in time. It does feel like there has always been this kind of, well, Norwich City do it this way because they have to, and because they want to, and because Delia and Michael, as we said, have their core values. But it's interesting, the whole timing of it, the fact they have just dropped out of the Premier League again. It comes, or our report obviously came out 24 hours after Stuart Webber's interview, where he spoke about the, not frustrations, but certainly the constraints that Norwich City operate in from a financial perspective. There'll be a lot of people looking at this as we speak and asking what it means for Norwich City in the Premier League, not what it means for the Championship, because with parachute payments and the position that they're in, they're already in a pretty strong financial position in the Championship. We've spoken on this podcast before, where if they go in this summer for a player alongside a raft of Championship clubs, they are probably in a healthy enough financial position to present a package that is pretty appealing for a player. In the Premier League, that isn't the case. Does this investment and what it potentially could be, as we've spoken about cautiously, offer some optimism to perhaps the end of this yo-yo cycle, but for the better, for Norwich City staying in the Premier League?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Norwich ultimately should have an element of pride for the way they've done it for years on end. I think they've ultimately punched above their weight. I mean, no other team, there's a lot of teams in that Championship mix that have pumped in a lot more money than Norwich City and have failed to get to the Premier League. And, whether fans like it or not, Norwich have been in the Premier League quite a number of times. Obviously, that is ultimately comes back to the relegation element as well. They have been relegated many times, and it is that yo-yo tag which frustrates fans, and I get that. I mean, I've had the frustration as well. Many a time I've been down the pub with my mates and they say, Delia and Michael aren't interested in the club, they don't invest in the club, but effectively they don't have the element of money that someone like a Mark Attanasio has to put in the club. I think if they had that element of wealth, they would be pumping it in because they love Norwich City as much as anyone else in the community that's a Norwich City fan. So this just gives Norwich City new opportunities. It's a chance to maybe get rid of that stigma that they can't compete in the Premier League. There's a lot of media outlets that hit Norwich City early last season saying, they're going to go straight back down. There's no investment. There's no maybe an interest to try and stay in the Premier League. They just want to take their parachute money and go straight back down to the Championship. And I think that is frustrating. I want to see Norwich City compete in the Premier League. This season's been quite difficult, seeing them get beat 5-0, 4-0, 3-0 by teams which in the past Norwich have competed with. So I think if Norwich can get themselves in a situation where they get back to the Premier League, they invest in the right areas, they continue to grow Colney. I think that's quite an important element. That's something Stuart Webber, whether fans like him or not, has done very successfully, as he's made Colney an attractive place now for players that maybe come to Norwich that maybe are in a slightly higher profile category to feel like this is a good workplace for me and this is somewhere I want to train and I want to be on a daily basis. So I think if Norwich can get the investment there and they can maybe go and put themselves in a different pond of players maybe in the future where they can pick out slightly better talents and bring them to Colney and say, look, this is where you're going to be working. We have this sort of, aim and objective to stay in the Premier League and sustain ourselves there. I think under Mark Attanasio, with the values he has that kind of align to Delia and Michael, that to me signals quite a positive future. Obviously, there has been other clubs that have gone down similar pathways and maybe they've failed, but I don't think they've maybe had that shared values element. And Norwich obviously are clear that this is going to be something that's going to benefit the community. The community and the fan base is going to be sort of the major focus and the sole focus of this deal. So to me, very positive, and I feel like this is an opportunity now that if Norwich can get themselves back in the Premier League and maybe under Mark Attanasio with a bit more money in their back pocket, that maybe they can go and compete, and that could be positive for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be really interesting to see how this develops in the weeks or months as it may pan out. We'll obviously see. I think there's obviously been a lot of connection to that timeline that Stuart Webber put on matters. Whether he was talking about this or not, we don't know solely. It's going to be, I think. Forget the short term. I think the long term is going to be pretty interesting as well. As Adam has said there's more plans to kind of add to what they've got at Colney already. There's, from what we understand, they're looking into how they can develop the city stand as well. All these things require investment and extra money, and it's difficult to keep finding them or going and asking fans to invest in a fund or whatever to fund these things. So eventually it is going to have to come from within, which again makes this the timing of this really, really intriguing. Something's brewing, that's for sure, and we'll keep our eye on it. There's probably a whole different podcast for another day on how we broke this story and the whole mechanics that are behind it, but we'll maybe save that for a book, as Paddy said right at the start. If we move into part 2 of this pod, then I thought we would reflect a little bit, not massively, because we've done a lot of reflections on Stuart Webber's chat, Paddy, but we're now, I mean, in many ways, he probably owes us a thank you for shifting things on a little bit, which I think we have done with this story. Not that that's our job to do, really, but how would you reflect on it a week later? Do you feel like now the dust has settled, now the storm has calmed down a little bit, that he has managed to draw a line under this season? And there is now, obviously, the pre-season friendlies have been announced, which we'll come on to in a minute, but it does feel like now that things have settled a little bit. Obviously, this story has probably helped them in that regard, as I say, but it does feel like now there's a real willingness from people to move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, we'll be getting our invoice in to S. Webber Enterprises for taking the focus firmly away from him within 24 hours of that club interview. Yes, I said at the time, I said when we did our video immediately after it dropped, that that probably does mark the full stop on last season, and now people can at least look forward because they've heard from the main figurehead, if we're honest, on last season. We'd like to have heard more, certainly in areas of recruitment and his own future. I don't think that we got the answers most people would have liked to have at least heard from him. So those issues for me weren't dealt with. But in terms of more broadly, I think he said what he was going to say or had to say on the season itself and kind of the limitations really of the model. And really, you need every single card you put on the table to be the right card, and that was very far from the case. So, we'd kind of heard or at least I would have expected probably something along those lines anyway. So I don't think there was anything too revelatory there. But, ultimately, going back to the recruitment element, I mean, I've seen it pointed out that, well, he's not going to sort of castigate a Jolis, for example, if they're now looking to move him on in the summer, because that's probably going to lower his prospective value. So maybe there was an element of that. But, I'd have been just very intrigued to know, was there, because of the recruitment changes that happened around this last summer around the football club, did that impact in a negative fashion? Would, if they had their time again, maybe push the boat out for an Aya or a Billing or an Adam Armstrong, or was it simply the finances were not available? Would they have maybe thought when Matthias Norman and Kabak, can we wait as long as they did wait? And that's all, I accept. That's not to berate anybody. That's all easy to put to him with the benefit of hindsight. But ultimately, the recruitment wasn't fit for purpose, and it would have been good to have a little drill down into maybe what was the mitigation, which I'm sure there was. There was plenty of, no doubt. Over and above, we maybe didn't have the finances to compete with a lot of other clubs, despite them embarking on a record transfer outlay. So, that was a missed opportunity for me. But more broadly, yeah, I think it did nudge the dial with obviously that teasing précis of something big around the corner, which now, increasingly feels like maybe it's investment related. But, ultimately, nagging at the back of your head is Stuart Webber still on board? And if he's not on board, then what does the next phase look like? And, again, if we'd have had that clarity from him in that interview, then that question wouldn't be persisting, really. Is he here within the parameters of a rolling contract, which is what he was or is supposed to be moving to in very short order, which means I'm assuming that he could, at very little notice, move on. But still, if he'd have said, no, that's me, I'm in for this season, I'm here, I'm staunchly alongside Dean Smith, then, we're good to go. But, could he not say that because of this, what seemingly is investment talks going on in the background? Maybe that was the reasoning why he couldn't go down that path. But again, all of this is us trying to hypothesize because we wasn't in the room, we wasn't allowed the opportunity to put questions to him, not just us, but any media for that matter. So, I don't think it puts the tin lid on certain issues, but for me, whether he'd done any media or not, I think that the time probably has come now to move it on to what's next in terms of the footballing side of this. Park whatever's happening in terms of investment talks. What does this window look like now that's about to hit in terms of Norwich City reshaping the squad, and then really getting the work Dean Smith is desperate, you sensed towards the end of last season, speaking in, keen to do in terms of embedding style of play, a philosophy, an understanding of what he wants, the demands he's going to place on these players. Let him get all that in place during pre-season, and then let's come out the traps very sharp and on the front foot in the Championship, and then the cycle will turn, and it'll be positivity and optimism and hope that this is feeling like things are moving in a positive direction now, and next stop Premier League, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you're right. Stuart didn't say outright that I'm here, I'm focused, I'm committed or whatever, but I did think there were little bits throughout the interview that he just dropped in that heavily implied that. So it would be quite a surprise if he was to revoke on that. He was speaking obviously about the summer window, and there was a bit of forward thinking ahead to this season as well. But you're right, never actually came out and said that. Would have been good to get clarity on that for sure. Plenty more reaction on Stuart Webber on our YouTube channel. You can check out a video that me and Pad did about a couple of hours after that interview dropped on that. And there's also plenty of written stuff on the PinkUn Plus app as well that you can dive into if you want to check that out. But I think we've spoken quite a lot about that interview already, so I didn't want to dwell on it too much. And Adam, to kind of close the pod, really, I thought we'd talk about obviously the pre-season friendly schedule that's been announced. if people are listening to this on, what would it be, Wednesday, it would have been the day after we were recording this, then essentially it's 1 month until we're off again with Norwich City ahead of the next season. They obviously start their campaign on Friday, July the 1st at Oldest Park. The kickoff for that one is at 7 o'clock. I'm absolutely delighted for the guys at Deerham. I know how excited they are about this and how much work is going to go into actually getting it on and getting everyone in the right place. And I'm sure that people will take up tickets for that one. After that, the following day, Norwich will then fly out to Germany. They're going to be on the Austrian-German border for an 8-day training camp. That is going to include an opening training session and a pre-season fixture before obviously they return to the UK and then face Kingsley in town at the Walks on Tuesday, July the 12th. Kickoff for that is at 7:30. There's then going to be a friendly on Saturday, July the 16th. That's going to be announced in due course. Before then, we head to the Abbey Stadium for Norwich City against Cambridge on the 19th of July, 7:30 kickoff for that, and obviously the Scotland doubleheader that we've spoken about. There's been a little bit. I've tried to not look at social media so much on a couple of days off, but on the couple of glances that I have given it, there was a little bit of a suggestion that maybe this was a relatively comfortable pre-season for Norwich City. But is there an argument that after the season and the fragility of the confidence and how quickly maybe the mentality was questioned, a few wins on the board probably isn't actually a bad thing as we build up to the Championship season?
No, I'd probably agree. I think it's an opportunity to just rebuild the confidence of togetherness within the squad. Obviously, ultimately pre-season, the major factor in it is building the fitness ahead of a pretty grueling Championship season. Obviously, with the fact we've got the World Cup break in November, it's going to be busier than ever, the Tuesday, Saturday schedule. So to me, it's just an opportunity to, especially if you're going to get some new players in, get them gelled in, and an opportunity for Dean Smith effectively to put his mark on the squad and his identity ahead of the season. I think we haven't really properly seen that. We've covered that over sort of the past podcasts that, maybe we haven't seen a Dean Smith identity and a Dean Smith squad yet. Obviously, he's going to have opportunities to add to his team. And to me, it's an opportunity, especially the fact they're all fairly local games, obviously, aside from the Scotland and the Germany trips. It's an opportunity for fans to go and get down to Deerham and Kings Lynn to watch these players up close and kind of build the excitement ahead of next season, which I think will kick in quite quickly. This season's quickly going to be forgotten about because it's not one that anyone's going to remember and tell their grandkids in years to come. So, yeah, this just feels like a good opportunity to get the fans on side early doors. And obviously, they've got the exciting weekend in Scotland and the Germany trip as well for anyone that wants to go a little bit further afield to watch Norwich.
Yes, absolutely. Pat, looking forward to pre-season as we close the pod.
Kings Lynn's always a good one. Yeah, that's where I cut my teeth back in the day. So I see some old faces at the Walks. So yeah, that's a nice one. You won't get a prettier press box view than the backdrop of the Walks there. So Scotland could be quite good. Funnily enough, I'd show him how long I've been doing this job now. But myself and David Coughley, formerly of the parish, when I think Chris Hughton took a Norwich team to Celtic Park, and even though it was pre-season, clearly you walked up the steps, looked in that stadium for the first time, and you just thought, wow, what this place would be like on an Old Firm day, jumping. So I'm quite looking forward to going back to Celtic Park, really. So they're the two standouts for me, mate. Yourself?
Yeah, sorry, I was Googling the last time Norwich played Celtic, and that game I'm talking about, that was a 1-0 Norwich win, wasn't it? Grant Holt.
Yeah, 2013 off the top of my head.
There you go.
I don't know. You'll have to confirm that to me. But,
as I say, I'm reading the opening paragraph, which is Captain Grant Holt's strike. A minute from time, still Norwich City's first pre-season win under manager Chris Hughton as they beat Scottish champions Celtic 1-0 at Parkhead. So I'm guessing that's the game you're referencing there. Yeah, I'm looking forward to Deerham. Obviously, I'm on the committee there, so that's probably. You probably catch me in a half and half scarf that day, probably not. Cambridge as well. I don't like to mention it much. I was very briefly on the books of Cambridge United as a young footballer, so that's always good to go there. It's a shame we don't have the Wes Hoolahan element, isn't it? And then likewise the Scotland trip. I'm really looking forward to. I think anyone who likes football sort of aspires to get up to if not both, certainly one of the Old Firm grounds. And that's going to be really good. Albeit we're not going to see it in its kind of full, as you mentioned, full atmospheric self, I suppose, like you would get on a Champions League night or against Rangers, for example. So that'll be good. I think Hibs will be good as well. Looking forward to getting up to Scotland. I haven't actually been up there before, and everyone says it's a really nice part of the world. So that's going to be nice as well. Thank you very much for listening. I think we're going to wrap it up for there. I don't know if we'll have one of these next week. Might depend on how my voice is, in all honesty. But I got through it, luckily, and so did you boys. So thank you very much for joining me. Thank you all very much for listening. Of course, more on the investors story or on transfer related stories or any stories across the summer, the PinkUn channels are the best place to go. You can get a subscription to the PinkUn Plus app as well if you're yet to do so. That is where a lot of our stories and backgrounders on these Americans are available for you to consume. So that's well worth doing to fill the month that we've got of Norwich City in action, I suppose, and then we'll be back at it at Alders Park in a month's time. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again very soon.